It will go down as a major disaster in southeast Minnesota and parts of southwestern Wisconsin.
We're going to continue to see more heavy rainfall.
Everyone else has been ordered to evacuate.
Massive flooding has taken place.
We feel lucky. I mean, we're alive.
And I have declared a state of emergency.
We're still looking and searching for missing people.
Nothing left. I mean, it's all just disaster.
There was like 17 inches of water coming our way.
I ran for my life down the steps.
I was just taking off, flying through the air.
This is the 10-year anniversary special, Deluge in the Dark, the flash floods of 2007.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. August of 2007 will go down in history in southwest Wisconsin and southeast Minnesota. Nearly 18 inches of rain fell during Saturday the 18th and Sunday the 19th, the largest 24-hour rainfall ever recorded in Minnesota.
We are coming to you from Rushford, Minnesota, where rain caused Rush Creek to overflow its banks, leaving virtually the entire town underwater.
Elsewhere, the rains led to devastating floods that killed 7 people and caused tens of millions of dollars in damage. For the next half hour, you'll hear from some of the people who lived through it.
We begin in Rushford the day before the storm. It was a beautiful Friday night, and while residents were aware of the predicted rain, they had no idea what was about to happen.
I didn't think that there was anything out of the normal.
By all appearances,
it was just a normal, routine Saturday with a rainstorm.
Residents in Rushford, Minnesota,
basically a steady, light rain,
were preparing to enjoy a weekend. For George Ingram, a line technician for a company called My Energy, that meant a day of work.
We started at like 8 in the morning with that outage up at the rest home.
But as the day wore on, the rain kept coming.
And it just got worse and worse and worse as the day progressed.
So the problems George was working to fix became worse and worse and worse. But the rain made it difficult to repair the damage.
We got about halfway down the valley and I yelled at my partner, Dean. I said, Dean, stop. We stopped and the road was washed out. So we had to back all the way out of the valley. So we were going to go and try and come in another way. We couldn't get in that way either.
They continued looking for alternative routes until they had nowhere else to go.
I ended up calling in. I says, hey, we got to quit. Somebody's going to get hurt.
About that time,
then we started getting reports of mudslides, and then we started getting a few calls in town here.
Mike Ebner is the director of operations at My Energy.
We just weren't getting anywhere with the crews. We started pulling the crews off.
But that was not the end of the night for Ebner, because he was also the fire chief. His work would continue, making difficult decisions as the water continued to rise.
I remember one call we had, Fillmore County Sheriff's Department calls and says, Rushford Fire, we just got a call from a lady in a car. She's got 2 kids. She's in the car. The water's up to the window.
Those calls went on all night.
I call it organized chaos, but the guys were just out doing their thing.
As morning approached,
so we could actually see boats going into our warehouse.
The company's line technicians were in the boats,
going in to try to dive into the water to retrieve their tools out of the trucks.
Underwater and lacking communication.
Billing and accounting was in this area. The admin was in there. We had dispatch in the back.
My Energy operations moved to higher ground.
We learned a lot from this.
At the Rushford Airport, 1,200 feet above the city.
And everybody shared chairs and computers and desks, and we made it work.
They talk about, a life-changing experience. This is one of them.
Jim Hoynes owns Rushford Foods. The flood destroyed his business. But 10 years later, the focus has changed. What residents want to talk about today is how most everyone in town stepped up to help everyone else recover.
We had 400 volunteers help us clean up the store, and we never asked for anyone.
This isn't about me or the department, it's about the community. I'm just so proud of everybody in this town. Just everybody came together and did it, and that's why we didn't lose anybody.
Well, I think it's just a good community. And
Les Ladewig was the city's mayor in 2007. He says the lesson learned is faith in one another.
People, I think, just general, their roots are here, and this is where they want to stay.
When it rains, some in Rushford think about 2007, hoping they don't have to go through another flood. But if they do, experience tells them they can handle it when everyone works to solve problems together.
Late Saturday night, members of the Rushford Fire Department were watching closely the Root River, but the water actually came from behind, over the road from Rush Creek. The former mayor says despite the devastation, Rushford was actually lucky. He says the Weather Service told him that storm split north and south of I-90, but if it had remained on one side or the other, Rushford could have seen much worse.
It's hard for people not affected by a tragedy such as this one to experience the terror and the heartbreak of those who were. The story of the Partington family of Brownsville, Minnesota perhaps comes closest to making that connection because it played out before our eyes. Lynn Partington's ordeal on August 19th of 2007 was among the most well-documented of the storm. He shared his story with News 19.
As bad as things are, we're still alive.
And ABC News.
It was just like a dollhouse being kicked over or blown over. My first thought was nobody could survive that.
The heavy rains that night caused a mudslide that brought a wall of mud rushing down the bluff in Brownsville just after 1 o'clock in the morning, destroying their home. Lynn and his wife and their grandson suffered minor injuries.
I ran for my life down the steps. I ran down to the street. And then I stood and I looked back and I watched the house. And I actually saw the roof lift, and it floated and turned 90 degrees and then dropped down on the street.
Even now, 10 years later, the memories are too painful.
It's hard for me to come here. It's such a beautiful view. And of course we did have a beautiful home, but if I stay away, then I don't think about it.
This drone video shows what the washed-out bluff looks like today and the path the mudslide took as it bore down surgically on their home. The path is still visible.
I have flashbacks, and especially when we have a lot of rain. And when we have these real heavy rains, I don't sleep at night. I get up, I'm looking out the window, and that's just something you have to live with.
Lynn and his wife Sharon lived in their dream home for 17 years and had hoped to spend their retirement here. Its perch overlooking the Mississippi River is breathtaking. But after what happened, Lynn has no desire to rebuild here.
But after walking up that road today and seeing the big boulder laying at the bottom of the steps and seeing the trees that are knocked down up above, it's not safe to be here.
It was almost deafening. Just the way I was rushing through and hitting the branches and the trees. And
while the Partington's ordeal was very well documented, the ordeal La Crescent police officer Mike Ernster faced that day 10 years ago lives only in his memory.
Well, I got goosebumps right now, to be honest with you.
This tree might be the one that saved his life that night. It looked much different when Mike arrived 10 years ago. Pine Creek is just a meandering stream today, but that night it was a raging river. Mike had arrived to answer a call to help rescue 3 people whose car had washed off the road and into the creek. But Ernster quickly learned he was in for a harrowing ordeal.
Crazy fast water, dark, dirty water, and just ripping through the trees.
His small boat overturned and the current washed him downstream. Luckily, he grabbed onto a tree and told rescuers to help others in danger. As he waited for rescue, with his life literally hanging in the balance, he recalls a feeling of calm.
To be honest with you, when I was in the second tree, I kept singing Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head just to keep myself from thinking about my wife and family and everything else that was going on.
And he says the experience gave him a new appreciation for the things we all tend to take for granted.
I mean, when you're younger, you think you're invincible, and it's just, you appreciate things a lot more.
Lynn Partington shared similar thoughts.
We're survivors. Yeah, it could have been worse.
And he hopes his family's story can inspire others going through difficult times. Persevere, take it one day at a time, and things will get better. What is it about the Coulee region that makes heavy rainfall especially dangerous?
Meteorologist Dan Breeden tells you about the factors that make this area susceptible to extreme flash flooding.
It's a combination of the Midwestern weather patterns that set the stage for extreme rain events and local factors that made the falling heavy rainfall dangerous. Summer, in contrast to winter, brings stagnant weather fronts and plenty of heat and humidity, allowing repeated training of thunderstorms over the same areas. Rainfall rates of 1 to 3 inches or higher per hour are possible in the right circumstances. The deep V-shaped valleys we call coulees help funnel heavy rain into raging torrents that join tributaries of the Mississippi River, like the Root River, to the Middle Fork of the Whitewater River, over to the Kickapoo River in Wisconsin. The water rises rapidly, sweeping away whatever is in its path. Unfortunately, that sometimes includes vehicles trying to navigate fast-flowing water over roads and bridges. It only takes 1 to 2 feet of water to float vehicles. The power of flowing water can be deceiving.
The scars of the flash flooding of August 2007 still remain. A massive mudslide took out a whole hillside of trees.
Heavy rainfall can lead to other dangers during an extreme storm.
As you add more moisture to the area, and if you were to get a significant rain event, a 3, 4, 5-inch rainfall total on top of that, then I think the risk of mudslides and hillslides and stuff would just grow that much faster.
Flash flooding killed 7 people during the storm of August 18th and 19th, 2007. Can a storm like this happen again? The answer is probably.
The torrential rains didn't stop at the Minnesota border. Parts of southwest Wisconsin saw major flooding. The National Weather Service reports that on the city's south side, between the evening of the 18th and the morning of the 19th, more than 12 inches of rain fell. The heavy rain caused street flooding, and many southside homes had significant damage and basement flooding. Emergency Management Director Keith Butler says the 2007 storm is memorable for its lasting impact.
Are we looking at a ½ inch for the rains tonight, or are we looking at a 5 or 6 inch rainfall? That's when we get into trouble. We never used to have those. We always had, the 1 inch rainfalls were pretty nasty, a lot of street flooding, things to have to deal with. But 6 inches or more of rain in one night, that's just astronomical. No place for the water to go except for where it doesn't belong.
Still to come, stories of survival from Brownsville and Gaze Mills when Deluge in the Dark continues.
This special presentation of Deluge in the Dark is brought to you by Better Hearing Center.
Welcome back. It wasn't water that did the most damage in Brownsville, Minnesota. It was mud.
News 19's Brittany Lake takes you back to one of the 5 homes destroyed by a mudslide and brings you a survival story.
A river town by nature, the bluffs in Brownsville, Minnesota provide a unique landscape, something that drew Joanne Krensky and her fiancé Scott Woodard to the area nearly 20 years ago.
Oh, it was so beautiful. This was my paradise up here. I loved it.
The same topography that makes this God's country became a devil to deal with the night of August 19th, 2007.
It just rained and rained and rained all day long. There was standing water here, trees, rocks, and the bluff side let go. Just wiped out our 2-story home.
You might call it a woman's intuition. Joanne had a premonition of the events that were about to change her life.
I really felt uneasy that night. And my thought was to leave, but 3 children sleeping. So just went back in to lay down and waiting for the morning to come.
But before day could break, it happened.
I heard this crack and I kind of knew what it was. And then I was just flying through the air. It was just, I didn't know when it was going to stop. Just seen Scott furiously throwing, things through the air in piles, looking, for the kids. And they were just underneath household belongings. And Scott had a rough ride. He went through the front of the house and down the bank and the driveway. And so I heard his call. He came up around the corner and was able to help me find the grandchildren. So that was a blessing that we survived that.
The years after weren't easy. Insurance didn't cover any of the damage. Scott and Joanne had to start over from nothing. And then, in 2015, another tragedy.
His heart gave out. Yeah. So he had a heart attack. Yeah.
But the foundation that kept Joanne going back then gives her the same strength today.
We did come out of this. I truly have the faith that it will be okay. Keeping faith, I guess, gets me through.
For Joanne, deeply rooted faith is strong enough to weather any storm.
Flash flood events are relatively common here. What made this event so extreme? Chief Meteorologist Dan Breeden looks at the weather conditions that helped produce the historic flash floods of 2007.
Extreme flash flooding events can happen during the summer when heat and humidity are high, and the weather pattern slows to a crawl or even stalls out. Such was the case August 18th and 19th in 2007. A stationary front and a warm front had set up just to the southwest of La Crosse in northeastern Iowa, westward into the plains on the 17th and 18th. Southerly winds began pumping very warm and humid air over the fronts and generated all-day light to moderate rainfall. Heavy rainfall occurred during the evening, lasting into a few hours after midnight on the 19th. Rainfall rates of 1 to 2 inches per hour occurred over a long period of time, finally becoming lighter after 2 to 3 a.m. But the flooding was already extreme.
We kept getting rounds of showers and thunderstorms that kept redeveloping, and then we even had another round overnight.
Watoka, Minnesota received an unofficial rain total of 17 inches. Utica, 14 inches. Nodine, Minnesota picked up 13.4. Stoddard, Wisconsin, 12.41. In La Crosse on the south side, 12.2. And La Crescent, Minnesota ended up with 11.58 inches.
Residents of Gays Mills, Wisconsin remain haunted by the 2007 flood. Many rescued from their doorsteps by boat. Their stories coming up.
Gays Mills, Wisconsin also hit hard by flash floods. That's where we find News 19's Caroline Hecker.
The small town of Gays Mills used to be home to around 700 people, but after the 2007 flood, nearly 200 left and never came back. For those who stayed, their reasoning is simple. This is home.
We've survived many floods as long as we've lived here. The people here have a lot of experience.
Carol Martin says on the morning of August 19th, 2007, she and her neighbors were chatting over breakfast. It had rained steadily the night before, but she wasn't worried, as flooding is a way of life in Gays Mills. Suddenly, things changed.
I think it was about 8 o'clock why the water started coming in the back door of our house. And so by that time, it probably had to be 4 feet. I mean, it was a flash flood. It came real quickly.
Within seconds, her furniture was floating, forcing Carol and her husband to leave their home of nearly 40 years behind.
Our neighbors that were there, they were saying, hey, we got to get out of here. So they had a canoe, and they said, pack your bag, and we are going to have to leave. We went out the front door. This was all water.
It would be days before the Martins were able to return home.
That 3-season room out back.
Or at least what was left of it.
We threw out probably half of our house.
After spending 3 years in Winona, the Martins returned to Gays Mills in 2010 to redo the house, but later agreed to a buyout and moved out of the floodplain.
We loved our porch.
It was right about here that Carol Martin and her husband stepped off their front porch and onto a boat the morning of the flood. 10 years later, as you can see, little remains except for Carol's beloved pear tree. Right up the street from Martin's, Steve Mickelson's grocery store, the Marketplace, suffered a similar fate.
Usually we have time to move things, but 2007 was different. It came overnight, so we didn't have that opportunity.
With no electricity for days, pounds of perishables were thrown out, leaving the small town without a grocery store.
That 07 flood was like, those don't happen very often. They said once in 500 years.
Amazingly, there were no fatalities during the 2007 flash flood in Gays Mills. While the town may have undergone a major facelift following the 07 flood, those who remain are here for the long haul.
Much of the town of Gays Mills has relocated to higher ground along Highway 131. Mickelson and Martin are now next-door neighbors, with the marketplace just a stone's throw away from Carol's front door. Both are happy to report they no longer suffer damage when it floods.
Floodwaters caused Como Falls in Hoka, Minnesota to seep into the city. The waterfall there makes for a quiet, serene, and scenic view. However, when the rain fell, the water from Thompson Creek overflowed and came flowing into town. The city of Hoka received more than 15 inches of rain in a 24-hour period. Restoration took months, and the reason it looks so good today, community volunteers.
The FEMA people were just amazed at the fact that people would come in and they'd say, well, you're eligible for this much. Well, I don't need that much. I'll take this, why don't you give that to somebody else? And they go, well, you know, this money is for you. And they couldn't believe that people would not accept it. And they couldn't believe that by the time they got here, this town was already moving.
The dam that created Lake Como failed during a flood in 1909 and allowed the lake to drain, but was rebuilt in 1922.
Dave Brand remembers well the chaos of coordinating the response to that storm 10 years ago. Dustin Lukey spoke with the former Winona County Sheriff, who began that day on a camping trip.
It was all clouded over.
When former Winona County Sheriff Dave Brand thinks back on August 2007,
I'll never forget it.
Vivid memories come calling.
We never believed that something this was going to ever happen.
Brand was camping with his family near Albert Lea, Minnesota, when what started as a typical summer storm,
we were getting a lot of rain,
started getting worse.
I kept in touch with dispatch.
So he took action.
I called out all the posse.
Made some more calls.
Through our code red system.
And ultimately,
we had everybody out and extra firemen and that sort of thing.
When he got back to the area,
it was a total disaster. And I called the governor for mutual aid for the military to come in to help us keep order in the area and to help us with moving people and rescuing people.
While coordinating the widespread response around the county and working with mutual aid, Sheriff Brand was also focusing in on some of the hardest hit areas, most notably here in Stockton, about 5 miles west of Winona.
In Stockton is the worst, I would say, because we've had a house where witnesses seen people on top of a house, and when they went back to try and rescue them, the house was gone, the people were gone.
The losses hit Brand hard.
In Winona County, we had 5 people that had passed away, and 3 of them I actually knew that were from where I live and known many years.
But the man who spent 44 years in law enforcement has a personal motto: never give up.
I'm not going to quit.
And it's something he takes to heart.
Think it over in my mind. I think, what should I have done differently or sooner?
And as the floodwaters receded into memory, Brand put his mind toward the positive.
Being proactive by keeping up emergency numbers and who can assist and who can't, so we can call in immediately the people that we need.
A need that can arise at a moment's notice, leaving an impact in its wake that's not likely forgotten.
Local authors have provided a record of the flooding. In Rushford, it was Bonnie Flagg Princeton who focused on the Rushford Volunteer Fire Department. In La Crescent, it was elementary school teacher John Steffes who wrote a book. I spoke with him about that. John, why did you write this book?
Well, I've lived in the community now for about 20 years, and I've gotten to know some of the firefighters and police officers and DNR officers, and they were all involved in the flood of 2007. So talking to them and hearing some of their stories, I thought it would make an interesting story.
What is an example of a story from that book?
On County 6, the night of the storm, it was about 2:30 in the morning, a car went off the road, and the emergency personnel people responded, and a police officer went out there in a very small duck skiff and tried to help the victims by getting life jackets to them. That boat flipped, and 3 firefighters went out in a rescue boat, a flat-bottom, 14-foot flat-bottom boat, and they also went in the water. And then DNR officer Scott Fritz went out in his airboat, and in the dark in the flooded woods with a couple firefighters on board was able to rescue most of the victims that were stuck in the trees. I used that as the majority of the storyline.
What did you learn, John, about why these emergency workers are willing to put their lives on the line for other people?
You know, it's a small town. We have community people that are basically helping other community people. They put their families aside at times to help out their neighbors. I have a lot of respect for that.
Tells you a lot about the strength of spirit of a lot of people.
Exactly, yes.
John, good to talk to you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Regardless of location, these cities and the people in them have a lot in common. They will often say this could have been much worse, and we're grateful for what we have.
They can also tell you about individual heroic actions that saved lives, but these people are often reluctant to talk about what they did. Instead, they'll tell you about a community effort.
People helping one another overcome what the storm left behind.
Thank you for joining us for Deluge in the Dark.